Welcome back, everyone, to GGN. Today is Wednesday, October 2nd, 2013. I'm Derrico, and this is my website, Global Government News, or ggnonline.net. We covered the Middle East, and the last news I tried to expand on what exactly took place, right? Because it's disorienting to people who even cover the news. Like I said, you can get burnt out from it, but also I almost wonder if that was the point, to get people to not want to cover this anymore. But it's getting more complicated, more complex, and it becomes harder to read between the lines. So hopefully these videos today will help explain it a little bit. I don't have all the answers, but definitely if you take all the articles and you put them together, you can try to figure out what's going to happen next, and that's what I'm trying to do with these two videos. We ended up with talking about Turkey being destabilized, and where are they going to go next, right? Well, let's see. I'm going to say Africa, one of the big ones. So, a new poll says Americans are sick of war. Americans think that Putin and even Assad have done a better job than Obama, says a CBS New York Times poll. More Americans disapprove than approve of how Mr. Obama is handling relations with Iran. So 82% says here the deal reached between the U.S. and Russia for Syria to turn over its chemical weapons. So they favor that deal. 82% favored it. Again, it depends on what the deal means, right? Also, it has to talk about Americans being sick of war, like we talked about. Oh, Americans, stop this. It was the American outcry that stopped this. Their protesting campaign that stopped an airstrike. No, it didn't. Americans still would not support airstrikes against the Syrian government, even if Syria fails to comply, an option that the U.S. says remains on the table if diplomatic solutions ultimately fail. So what we'll see here is, because they're not going to be able to just strike them, is that they'll just try to get regime change. They'll put pressure on them, Kerry. Oh, they're not meeting the timetables, and Assad isn't sincere. But they'll try to beat that election timeline next year. So if people are sick of war, then how do they sell wars to the public? Well, they don't really have the wars like they used to. And I think when they have people protest wars, they're able to co-opt that and use that for their own needs, for their own whatever agendas that, whatever they may be. Like with the Vietnam War, yeah, you didn't want the fighting the boogeyman out in the jungles, but at the same time to have people spitting on troops, that's to create subversion, and that worked perfectly in line with that era, which is to subvert the culture. And really have people just be apathetic, tune out, ultimately. But it says here that in Britain, the MOD study sets out how to sell wars to the public. They say the armed forces should seek to make British involvement in future wars more palatable to the public by reducing the public profile of repatriation ceremonies for casualties. It says here that they're examining how to figure out how casualty-averse public opinion include the greater use of mercenaries and unmanned vehicles, as well as the SAS and other special forces, because it says losses sustained by the elite soldiers do not have the same impact on the public and press. And that's what they're doing in Syria, too, as far as public opinion. They use that mercenaries, probably private contractors, that's what I've covered that before, but also terror proxy forces. And one of the things you have to remember about when you use special forces, they're shadowy elites, you use private contractors, or you use terror proxy forces, i.e. Al-Qaeda, none of them are responsible, right, for their actions. CIA drone strikes not responsible, but usually ground troops usually are. They discuss how public reaction to casualties can be influenced, and recommends that the armed forces should have a clear and constant information campaign in order to influence the major areas of press and public opinion. So think about it, Vietnam, right? It was all on the TV and everywhere it was covered. So you can go on a limb and say that was done on purpose. To manufacture an opposition to the war, to hate your own country and your own people and not trust your government or like your government anymore, and to basically tune out, like I said. So a lot of things happening when they do stuff like that. U.S. Army looking to contractors for African operations. U.S. AFRICOM wants private contractors to move their military equipment and supplies from the U.S. to Egypt and 55 other countries within the area of responsibility. I like that. That's their interests, right? Your interests, not really. It's big corporations' interest and the powers that be. We have 4 Israelis held in Guinea for plotting coup. French newspapers saying that they were allegedly involved in inciting political unrest in the African Republic ahead of the elections last, Saturday? So there's all kinds of things that are going on behind the scenes, such as that, destabilization. Obama waves ban on sending military aid to countries with child soldiers. This is actually kind of old, but I don't know why it's back in the news cycle, because maybe that's where they're going next, big time, scaling it up. They're already there, but they're scaling it up in Africa when they're done, since they're done with Syria, October 1st, 2013. Talking about human rights, the Obama regime yesterday issued blanket waivers exempting 3 countries from a federal law banning U.S. military aid to countries that use child soldiers. Wow, look at this. Remember I was talking about Yemen? That's one of the countries up there. Yemen, Chad, and South Sudan. Somalia and the Democratic Republic of Congo received partial waivers as well. Somalia, so those are the 2 ones I was saying. Yemen and Somalia, and of course we'll get into Sudan, i.e. Africa. But let's not forget about Mali, right? Mali explosion, part of new escalation of violence. It says here this Mali army and separatist rebel forces clashed on Sunday. This was last Sunday, September 29th. Went off near a storage facility for the United Nations World Food Program. So these were the Tuareg rebels. They're calling them separatists, but the Tuaregs, they're the ones that wanted the autonomy, that fought with the central Malian government and kind of partially with France in order to get rid of Al-Qaeda, right? And that basically got rid of any kind of resistance from them, from the Tuaregs. So, so that's what we have, right? Wherever they want to go and destabilize or have regime changes or get the resources, Al-Qaeda shows up. So these guys helped get rid of them. Then afterwards, they realized they got a bad rap. They should have known, but they tried. And they said, the democratic process is not going to work. And all of a sudden, now you have this stuff going on in Malian army clashes with Tuareg rebels for a second day. So the second day, they say they threatened to derail peace efforts in northern Mali and complicate France's plan to reduce its troop presence in the West African country following a military operation that destroyed an Islamist enclave with the help of them. So you see, Somalia was on the list of one of the waivers by Obama to allow recruiting of child soldiers. And that's another form of terror proxy forces or mercenaries that are not accountable for their actions, unlike regular ground troops. And then you have the Kenya mall shooting. Kenya says here that Kenya's National Intelligence Agency knew an attack would happen. So they knew that the attack was going to happen. They allowed it. That gives them a way to tie it to Somalia. So as far as that goes, the bloodbath in Kenya, they're reaping the benefits of U.S. AFRICOM collaboration. And Western media is attempting to use the attack as a pretext to launch a military campaign against neighboring Somalia while fueling anti-Muslim sentiment across profoundly ignorant audiences in the West. I found that with Russia's RT, UK Islamic school shut down after accusations of strict religious practices. And Moscow warns Muslims against animal sacrifice on eve of major holiday. They're putting it out there to get into the consciousness of the world. Al-Shabaab threatens to escalate attacks in Kenya. This comes after Kenya refused to pull its soldiers out of Somalia. They say that the Kenyan government's decision to keep its invading force in Somalia is an indication that they haven't learned or valuable lessons from the Westgate attacks. Something to note, of course, besides this is just going to play into their hands, the West. to have a presence there. They should know better, but you know, if this is controlled opposition, it makes perfect sense. Kenya currently has over 4,000 army troops stationed in southern Somalia where they've been battling al-Shabaab. Kenyan forces are part of the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM. So, and they get training and equipment from the U.S. One also notices too that seems that al-Shabaab is giving the West good ammunition into intervening in Somalia on behalf of their puppet regimes that they already have set up, take their resources. But of course they call it, you know, anarchy, right? It's a failed state. That's what Libya is. It's a failed state. See this from, you know, Christian Science Monitor, mainstream media. Africa desert helps breed radicals from al-Shabaab to Boko Haram to Mr. Marlboro, whatever the hell that means. But this is from September 29th, 2013. Again, this is all in the news from places like Mali to Nigeria. So they've been hiding and waiting to hit Western targets, including what? The big one, Israeli targets. The zone may become a breeding ground for terrorists, says the UN Security Council. So wherever they want to go and exploit them, take the resources, export those people into mostly other countries, mostly white countries, they'll do what? They'll say Al-Qaeda's there. A recurring theme I'm trying to stress. Britain's SAS, their special forces, are set to strike Somali al-Shabaab Mal terror group. They're set to join U.S. and French special forces in a strike against the Westgate Mall terror group. So there you go, folks. Inside Somalia, al-Shabaab has gained support, yet the puppet regime there, their government says that they actually control the capital. So much of the country remains under extremist control. What you have to remember here is it's about being in the hands of the people. So you can say, like in Libya, the resources for the most part were in the hands of the people. It benefited them. You have here, much of the country remains in extremist control. In other words, the resources are in the hands of the people. Unfortunately, the outsiders will not do any business with them because they won't allow themselves to be exploited and the resources to be sold off at pennies on the dollar like they're doing in other countries. I'm not condoning or glorifying al-Shabaab by no means, but just basically to explain to you how this kind of works, at least that's how I see it. Just something that's in the news about Nigeria, anything that's about it, right? 100 missing in Nigeria boat accidents, dozens dead after it was overloaded. At least 44 killed as Nigerian militants hit college dorm. They burned the classrooms as well, so they killed them while they were sleeping. Unlike the Taliban, it's the third attack against the school. It says here that Boko Haram, initially founded on the idea of spurning Western education, is presumed behind it. And old tricks is the U.S., Saudis, and Qatar attempt an Arab Spring retread in Sudan. Protests are a smokescreen, they say, for unfolding the U.S., Saudi, Qatari-backed violence seeking regime change in Sudan. So it reveals yet another Western-engineered uprising designed for regime change in favor of a new Western-friendly client regime. So all the independent media organizations and NGOs are here from the West to prop up this thing. Example, WorldTribune.com. Meanwhile in Sudan, fuel riots, a hiring spree of ex-Soviet air mercenaries and preparations for war. The IMF's issuing a warning on South African economy. So they're telling what to do. They said they must quickly implement reforms if it wants to avoid this crisis. So the global powers, they can create a crisis by, changing prices, fuel prices, by making it a living hell. So there's legitimate concerns to protest, but they go in there and co-opt it, or especially around election time. And this is what they've done in Yemen. This is what they do in other places, like currently in Venezuela. Can't really stand when the media refers to failed states as anarchy. How many opportunities we actually have to have real anarchy. They call, the only example is Somalia. That's another failed state. So, Libya and anarchy, 2 years after NATO humanitarian liberation. We have gunmen attacking Russian embassy in Libya's Tripoli. So this is what it's about. Rebel mortar fire hits China's embassy in Damascus. So it's about constant destabilization. Separation of the people from the resources. They have a Berber minority in Libya shuts off gas pipeline. They said they're protesting their marginalization and basically the decision-making process. 65 killed, 203 wounded as Baghdad suffers more bombings. 1,200 were killed in September alone. That's nearly threefold since last year. Pakistan, 42 killed in a car bomb. 3 days later, another bomb attack kills 3, injures 12. They say women and children were burning in this blast. Please join me in part 3. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.